Okay, so let's get started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the beginning of another great series with our friend Mark Schenker. I'm Michael Bellicosa. I'm the head of adult programming at Wilton Library, and I'm very pleased to be introducing this lecture and this series, which is made possible with the support of the literary series in memory of Amy Quigley. Because we have a large audience, we'll handle the Q&A as follows. Usual way for those of you who've been here before, you can send me your questions or comments using the Q&A button, and I'll relay them to Mark when he wants to take a break for comments or at the end. And Mark is always happy to answer questions that you can email him directly. And if you don't have his email address, just send me an email and I'll send it right back to you. Looking over the sign-up list, I think we're all pretty familiar with Mark's illustrious background and his literary resume. So I will dispense with the long intro because we have a lot to cover, and we'll just get started. Mark.
Thank you, Michael. So thanks as always to the Wilton Library in general and to Michael in particular. Thank you to the many of you who are not only here tonight. How many people are now here, Michael? Well, I'll just go on and say the many of you who come recurringly to the series. So thank you.
Hey, Mark, I was on mute. It's about 50.
Okay, that's a good crowd. So let me say that I noticed that when I did the short stories back in the spring, that when people ran out of conversation about the actual stories, the literature, I would invite the patrons to comment on how those issues, many of them biographical or autobiographical about the author, resonated with them in their own lives. And that was a mixed success. Some people had things to share and some people didn't. So I told Michael that my plan for the fall that we're now doing is to pick books that are very good books on their own terms, but are also known as being the inspiration for very well known, and in some cases, very classic movies like The Maltese Falcon, like Strangers on a Train, directed by Hitchcock, like 2001, A Space Odyssey. Some of the books we're doing are more well known as a book than as a movie. Many people know The Old Man and the Sea by Spencer Tracy, by Ernest Hemingway, and don't know the movie made with Spencer Tracy. It got mixed reviews, and we'll talk about that when we get to Spencer Tracy. But the idea is, I want to underscore, we're talking about the books. We go from 1930 with Maltese Falcon to almost 1970 with 1968's 2001. So a good span of 40 years in the middle of the century. And we're going to do in the first half of this series a hard-boiled detective novel, Dashiell Hammett's Maltese Falcon, a classic. We're then going to turn to a very British book. Daphne du Maurier is not only a British writer, she is a dame of the British Empire. When it was made into a movie, it starred Brits like Laurence Olivier and George Sanders and Dame Judith Anderson. Very British movie, directed by Sir Alfred Hitchcock, also a Brit. His first American movie and the only movie for which he won an Academy Award, but a British production through and through. And then for our third session, we return to American roots with a Western by a first-time novelist called The Oxbow Incident that we'll get to. So I'll begin tonight by saying that The Maltese Falcon has the distinction of being a genre book in a genre that was originated by Americans. In a very popular magazine called The Black Mask, think of a robber, The Black Mask, writers like Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and other less well-known figures created what became the hard-boiled detective fiction. Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe, the Continental Op, These men who are not perfect men, who sleep with their partners' wives, who are guilty of different kinds of transgressions, even breaking the law to get a criminal, but they are men of honor. And in this novel, for example, although he was sleeping with his partner's wife, he has to do something to avenge Archer's death, because when a man's partner is killed, you have to do something. He is certainly in lust with Bridget O'Shaughnessy, the Mary Astor part. Uh, he may be in love with her. He himself says he's not sure. But he says, I won't play the sap for you. These modern day knights, Knights, as I'll explain, are men of honor who not only get their man, solve the crime, but they're above being tempted with money. Given $10,000, you multiply by about 16 to get the current value of the money that's being talked about here. This is true across the genre. These hard boiled detectives are flawed people. They're guilty of transgressions, but they are honorable to their client. They're honorable to the law in the broadest sense. And it's called hard boiled because they're tough guys. And this is a very American phenomenon. This novel was published serially in 1929 when the stock market crashed, and it was published as a book in 1930. It's a Depression era novel. It's a Depression era genre. People who had lost everything or who were struggling liked to read gangster novels, liked to see gangster movies. The first two gangster movies made by in Hollywood, Warner Brothers, were Little Caesar with Edward G. Robinson, established him as a big star and a gangster, and Public Enemy with James Cagney, the same, published, released within a year of each other. Those were mega hits. People wanted to see, in Depression era America, people getting back at the banks by robbing them. They wanted to see people who have the same American dream that they did, but were able to get it by breaking the law. And it was very cathartic to go to a movie in which these gangsters were being lionized as heroes, using Tommy guns, which were surplus supplies from World War I, and wreaking havoc over the landscape. So this is part of that terrain, but focusing on the individual hero. Spade and Archer is a company, a partnership that have very male names, Sam Spade. Dashiell Hammett's given name was Samuel, so he named Sam Spade, his detective, after himself. And Archer, of course, is a male image for most people. Spade and Archer are people who get things done. Again, not perfect. Archer is not only stupid by letting Bridget get the drop on him, but he clearly was enamored of her when she came in and said her name was Miss Wonderly and took the first shift. And he probably didn't see through, as Spade did, the cover story that she was there to locate her sister. When he winds up dead, Spade wastes no time with any tears. He immediately tells Effie, his assistant, change the name on the door, the name on the window, to Sam Spade. And in the movie, the window is behind him. So when he's talking as part of the partnership, or when he's talking as his own detective, you see the name on the window behind him. Set in San Francisco, because that's where Dashiell Hammett made his home with Lillian Hellman at this time in his life. And it was very quickly, it wasn't so quick. By 1940, it was made into a movie written and directed by John Huston, his first movie, and I'll talk more about that at the end. So I'll point out to you what you may not have noticed. In the novel, you never know what people are thinking. It is very, very empirical. You hear what people say, you see what they do, we're told their actions and their thoughts, but you don't know what they're thinking unless they speak out loud about it. And that's very action oriented. It doesn't mean that people don't have interior lives. It means the interior lives of people are not easy to get at. One thing in the movie is everybody's lying, and every story has another story and another story and another story, as if reality cannot be trusted. That makes for a good mystery, but it also reflects the uh, trauma and paranoia of the age, where people living in Depression era America don't know what's going to happen next. We cannot overemphasize how much the gangster movie and the detective novel are products of a very traumatic time in American history. When we get to the Western, our third section, the Western is a mainstay of an America that can be trusted. Yes, people can be evil, people can lie, but the idea that life is a kind of hall of mirrors is not typical of most Westerns. And the Western we're doing this season is not a typical Western. If you've never heard of the Oxbow incident, movie or book, I encourage you to both read the book and then see the movie with Henry Fonda, Harry Morgan, Anthony Quinn, very good works of art. So I'm going to pause there to say this last point that I'm making, that you do not see into the hearts and minds of people, is both to make it more mysterious and because the age is itself distrustful of who's what, who can be trusted. So I'm going to ask now if anyone wants to share a comment rather than a question, a comment about your reading or rereading the novel, especially if your comment is broad about your view of the novel in its totality rather than a particular scene. What did you make of, if you know the movie, of reading this book for the first time, reading it recently? I'm happy to take comments as narrow as you like, but I prefer broader ones if you would.
Okay, folks, you know the drill. We'll take a minute. Feel free to use that Q&A button. And I
While
will.
we're at, I'll say that one of the oldest forms in literature is when something happens a second time with a difference. So there are two meetings between Spade and Caspar Gutman, the fat man, in the latter's hotel room. And the first one, um, Spade pretends to be angry so that Gutman doesn't know how professional he is. In the second one, when he learns about the backstory of the Knights of Malta and the history of the bird that's been chased around Hong Kong, Constantinople, and now to San Francisco, he is drugged by Gutman. Gutman gets the better of him. That's very common in lots of literature. The second time is the same but different.
So I got
Cairo
a,
to, yes, go ahead, Michael.
so I got a couple of comments, a couple of connected comments from Susan. The first, she says, Effie was a contrast to the other women. Do you think Spade was in love with her? And she followed that by saying she did speak her feelings and her mind, especially when asked.
Yeah. Um, if you're talking to me personally, no, I don't think he's in love with her. She is a prototype of a kind of figure in lots of movies that are dominated by men. And look at all the men in this movie. And Miss Wonderly is a mess. Effie is clear sighted. She is an excellent assistant. She tells Sam that Miss Wonderly is all right, and that's good enough for him. When he needs to hide her somewhere, he hides her in Effie's home with Effie's agreement. Effie is, um, in the context of the time, Effie is a woman who has a male's competence. That's not my view. I'm saying she's treated as a non-sexual object because she is an excellent assistant. Um, and she's the one who is entrusted with um, taking care of Miss Wonderly, Bridget O'Shaughnessy. when she's in danger.
So we've got a comment from Paul who said that he watched two versions of the movie and
There are
was
four, but two is good.
and
Yeah,
he was surprised to see how differently the main character could be interpreted.
yeah. There's a version that has Betty Davis in it that is not a classic movie. This movie is a classic because John Huston, who was always a respecter of the source novel of the movies he made, and almost every movie he made was based on not only a clear literary work, but sometimes a masterpiece, Red Badge of Courage, The Dead by James Joyce. Um, and he stayed very close to the original novel. Um, that movie takes reference to the fact that we're told that Spade has devil-like features and he has a kind of V-shaped face. And The Devil Was a Lady is the title of that movie. And that's an old meme going back to Eve of Adam and Eve about how it's the woman who's the seductress.
And Kate has made the point that she saw the movie years ago, but had not read the book until this course. For me, what made it a good book also made it a good movie. Crisp, witty dialogue, much of it carried over verbatim from the novel, and distinctive characters.
Yes. So who is that who said that?
Kate.
Thank you. So I'll piggyback on that as long as we're talking about the movie again. And I want to make it clear when we get to books that where the movies are not so well known as Humphrey Bogart's movie, I hope we'll talk as much as we like about the book. But here's what John Ford did. He was a screenwriter, but hadn't been a director. And he wrote some screenplays that did very well for his movie company. And he was rewarded by being told that he could look through the old um, um, source materials that the film company owned. And if he wanted to make a movie, he could make it from one of those. And he decided that the version that had already been made of the Maltese Falcon was an inferior movie. And he asked for permission to do another version of the Maltese Falcon. The studio head thought he was wasting his time, but they had promised him the script of his choice as long as they already owned it, which they did. And so he went ahead and made it. And what he asked his assistant to do, his Effie, was to go out and buy two copies of the novel and to tear the pages so that on large cardboard sheets he could paste each page on one side and then the second copy of it on the other side, so that he had a large format of every page of the novel front and back. I hope I'm being clear. In order to paste a novel's page onto a cardboard, you were going to lose the back page, so he had to have two copies of the book. And he used that text of the book for his shooting script. Things were added and things had to be deleted in terms of censorship, but the lines in the book are very much lines in the movie because John Huston, a great respecter of the writing, and it really is a very well written novel of its kind. One of the things about the detective hero is that he's modeled on the ancient knights who sometimes were rogue characters. In Japan, they were called ronins, Ronin. Ninjas didn't have a master, who went around helping damsels in distress. And their honor was that they did what they should do no matter what. They did not work for the king or the earl or the noble. In this novel, they don't work for the DA or for the law uh, in the sense of the local police or legal system. They work for their clients, but they're not doing it just because they're paid. They're doing it because working for the people who hire you is honorable. And it's not an accident that there's a portion of the book that talks about the Knights of Malta who found this, who did this bird as an homage to the King of Spain. And that story involves pirates. It involves going to the Holy Land And one of the oldest stories in Western civilization, dating back to King Arthur, we did Idols of the King some seasons ago, was the idea that Christian knights abandoned their responsibility to the Round Table and to Arthur and to Britain by going to the Holy Land to fight a foreign war. And along the way, they heard a rumor that there was something, different versions of it in different versions of the myth, called the Holy Grail. The cup, or more likely a kind of saucer, that is rumored to have been the vessel that Jesus used at the Last Supper. And the Holy Grail, which is found eventually by Galahad, because he's pure of heart, is in the Knights of the Round Table the monkey wrench thrown into the business, because those knights are supposed to be minding their king and their duty in England, and instead they're going on this romantic quest for something that may just be a dream. That idea is part of what informs the odd fidelity of hard-boiled detectives. They may step outside the law, they may insult the district attorney, they may lie and even steal, but not for personal gain. It's to do it to solve the case. And in this case, Miss Wonderly, great name, Bridget O'Shaughnessy, is not his client. It's that he has to avenge the death of Miles Archer, even though he was sleeping with his wife. And that ethical code, that he's going to do the right thing, even though it may not be legal in the usual sense, that he's acting like a knight errant, that's the phrase, that is, going out on his own, not walking the straight and narrow. That's in a lot of these novels. In fact, Raymond Chandler, who adored Dashiell Hammett and emulated him, and wrote a novel called Farewell, My Lovely, in the early 40s, in which a man is looking for his long lost love. The man is named Moose Malloy, a not very bright ex-con, ex-boxer. He's looking for a woman that he knew before he went to prison called Velma, and he's eager to find her. And he uses Marlowe, Philip Marlowe, the detective in that, to find her. When he finds her, she's married to a wealthy man whose name is Grayle. His last name is Grayle. That is, when he finds Velma, Velma is Grayle. But it turns out she's a liar, she's a thief, she's a murderer. And that's part of the playing off this notion that these men, these detective heroes, are trying to do the right thing for their own code of justice, and because they've been hired, which is respectable in an age when many people wish they had a paycheck. I hope I'm making this clear. The dynamic of the Depression animating gangster movies and hardboiled detective novels is very, very strong. And again, like the Western that we'll do in two more meetings, very distinctly American genres. America was responsible for creating 3 or 4 different kinds of movies from scratch: the big Broadway musical, the screwball comedy, the Western, and the gangster movie. Those were American forms, and this is part of that. Maltese Falcon.
So I've got a comment from Linda. There is something interdependent about the characters in the movie version. Could Spade be explained without Wilma? Could Miss Shaughnessy be a believable character without Spade? And so on, throughout every character and every scene. All equals perhaps brilliant and perfect character development. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a smart observation. I thank you for making it. Let me say that it's a movie that has a kind of claustrophobia to it. So one set that occurs more than once is Archer's office, Spade and Archer's office. One set that appears more than once is the hotel room with Gutman, or the lobby. There are some street scenes where he is sent on a wild goose chase to an address that doesn't exist, but that's uncommon. He also finds Miss Wonderly in a doorway. But there's a scene in the hotel lobby. There's a scene in Cairo's apartment. They're the places he searches. Um, it's a very intimate novel. San Francisco is a big city. There aren't a lot of city shots in the movie because they aren't in the novel. And the reason they're not in the novel is Dashiell Hammett is writing a novel that has a kind of claustrophobia to it. And when you see the movie, or if you've seen the movie, you know that the last scene has pretty much every character in the movie in Spade's apartment, and then finally the two cops come in as well. It's like something out of Night at the Opera that so many people are there, and everything gets wrapped up first in the apartment, and then when we hear later on what happened to the guys who tried to get away. I should also say, in fairness to culture, that despite Effie's sterling character, most of the genre movies about detectives and gangsters are not only ignorant of women's value, but disrespectful of it. So it's not an accident that these books have femme fatales and that Miss Wonderly is a wonder. And she's played by, in the day, a very, an actress who was known for being not just sexy, but vulnerable. And of course, he sleeps with her, which they can only intimate in the 1930s and 40s. Um, and it needs to be said that the same thing's true of the Western, that in most Westerns, the woman is a schoolmarm. Maybe she's Grace Kelly, who is the wife of the hero. And Grace Kelly actually has a role to play, atypically, of a woman in a Western. But mostly women are in Westerns to dance in dance halls, to be a break to the male plot. And despite Miss Kitty in Gunsmoke, who was in the same saloon for what felt like 50 years, those saloons were brothels. They were not just dance hall girls, they were women who gave you sexual favors for money. Uh, Male genres do not do very good well by women. The Old Man and the Sea is a one character novel, essentially, if you don't count the fish, and that's Santiago, the fisherman. But Rebecca is very much the next novel we're doing, places a woman who's alive in the center of the action, and a woman who's dead in the center of the same action. Strangers on a Train is about two male characters, but written by a fantastic American crime writer, Patricia Highsmith, who wrote the talented Mr. Ripley series of books. And of course, 2001 is very male dominated as a adventure movie in the future. And I think it's important that we recognize that even though we can celebrate certain genres, we should be aware of their limitations.
Okay, Janet's just popped in a comment, uh, a little tangential, but related to what you were just talking about before, about a movie that Clint Eastwood was in. I'm not sure if he made the movie or if he was just in it, called Unforgiven, and that
He
she's pointing
directed
out.
he directed it and starred in it. I'll just say as a footnote, when he saw that screenplay 20 or 30 years before he made the movie, he bought the rights to it, knowing that he wanted to star in it, but knowing that he was too young to play William Murray, the retired gun killer. And so what he did is, if you buy the rights to a script, if you don't produce it in a certain number of months or years, I forget how many, you have to renew your purchase to stop people from buying scripts and putting them on the shelf, so that you didn't have your competitor. You could beat your competitors. And Clint Eastwood renewed by paying again the money to make the movie for something like 20 years, until he felt he was old enough to make that movie. And he made that movie. Gene Hackman was in that movie, Richard Harris, um, um, the black man, Morgan Freeman. It is a masterpiece of a movie. Great lines, great acting, and he uh, intended, as soon as he saw that script, to have that be something that he would age into. So, is there a comment about that?
She was pointing out that the main character was a modern knight errant.
Yes, yes, and he has promised his now dead wife that he'll stop his killing ways. And it seems clear that he's not being hyperbolic when he says in his lifetime he's killed men and women and children. He was a killer and a thief, and he's now retired with his two children, two young children, on a pig farm where he honors his wife by trying to keep his practice not to shoot again. And he decides to shoot because the women, the prostitutes, they use a different word for them that begins with WH, are trying to punish the men who cut up one of their uh, women, one of the women, when he was laughed at for not being large enough in bed, as you will. And they put up a lot of money, and word is out that if you come to this town where Gene Hackman is sheriff and kill the 3 or 4 men who are in this gang, you will get that money. And Clint Eastwood's characters decide that he'll take up the gun again because his farm is failing, the pigs are ill. He goes with Morgan Freeman, who used to be a friend of his, not in the killing rampage, but on the farm. And the two of them go off with a nearly blind, young, foolish man to kill these men who have done this terrible injustice. And it's a very, I want to tell you, it is an excellent movie. It's one of the best Westerns I've ever seen.
And I just want to throw out there, I hope that some of you folks in the audience managed to catch our program. Literally just about 5 days ago, we had a program here about the films of Clint Eastwood with the great guys coming back to do the films of Billy Crystal, the films of Robin Williams. He's done a lot of great programs, but the Clint Eastwood one was literally just a few days ago.
Well, Clint Eastwood, along with Billy Crystal and Robin Williams, one of the great comedians of modern cinema, Clint Eastwood. I'm not sure the man smiled on camera more than once or twice. He was known as the Stone Face when he made those spaghetti westerns. But the movie Unforgiven is loaded with great lines. When they kill one of the men who have hurt the women, remember, they didn't kill the women, they mutilated one woman, but they have to kill the men to get the money. The young kid who has been all bravado now has killed somebody and he doesn't feel good about it. And he says to Clint Eastwood, as they're sitting up on a hill, but I guess we could say he had it coming, right, Will? He had it coming. And Clint Eastwood says in his voice, which I won't try to emulate, we've all got it coming, kid. We've all got it coming. That's a great line. That's a great line.
Okay,
So,
well,
look, I want to say again, think about the rhythm of a limited number of very tight sets, not a city novel, an indoor novel. It's partly because it's how it was written, and it's partly because in 1940, when the movie was made, there was no location shooting. When uh, when Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn made John Huston's African Queen, they went to Africa. That was unheard of. You did not go to locations for expense that were expensive. You shot on local sets. If you see the movie of the Oxbow incident, or if you have seen it, the set that they're on is laughably a Hollywood set. They're supposed to be out in the Western wilderness. It's a joke, but it's because the movie's made in 1943 and there were limitations set by the government on expenses for movies when there was a war effort going on. And you couldn't go across the landscape the way John Ford would do later in movies like The Searchers because the money wasn't there. So they conceded that it looked pathetic, but that's a great Western with a bad look. The Oxbow incident. It's called the Oxbow incident because the tree that dominates the scene has a a Y branch that looks like the twin semicircles that go over a pair of oxen shoulders. Michael, where are we for time?
We're 20 to 8.
So I want to encourage you again. I've said a lot about the book, but I hope that if you've made other observations about it, the book, you'll have more to say about, for example, do you admire Sam Spade as the hero of the book? Do you think that the characters are cartoon versions of villains and heroes? Do you think that Mary Astor's character is a joke as a kind of stereotype of the woman who bats her eyes and is helpless, when in fact she's not only someone who is masterminding trying to find the bird, but she's a killer?
Well, let's see. We wait for any comments from people. Let me just mention something to you that you can comment on what we were talking about before we started. That when you said that he had the book taken apart so that he would have the entire text in front of him, literally to use verbatim as the script, in even though leaving certain things out, of course. But that if you want to comment about the famous last line of the movie.
Yes, so Michael and I were having our green room discussion, and he asked me if that he had read that the last line of the movie, it's the stuff that dreams are made of, when one of the cops asked Sam Spade, what's this all about, this bird, which we know at the end of the movie was a phony and probably always a phony and was painted black to disguise its value, but it has no value. Michael said he had read that that line was not in the original novel. And speaking too quickly, I said, oh, yes, it was. And then Michael, like a good librarian, and I mean this without any sarcasm, got a copy of the book wherever he's calling from and saw that it's not the last line of the book. It's a line from Shakespeare. The stuff that dreams are made, the Shakespeare line is, it's the stuff that dreams are made on. But that's John Huston's very literate, that what's driving the movie, what's driving Depression era America is people have dreams of hitting it big. People want to win the lottery. And the Falcon is the lottery. That it's connected with the Holy Land, with knights, with the Holy Grail, is all to the good because it's not mundane, it's a high calling. But the actual calling has you dealing with the Fat Man and Wilmer and Joel Cairo, who, in the context of the movie, and certainly it's hinted at in the book, are homosexual characters, or at least bisexual characters. So Peter Lorre plays Joel Cairo, and Humphrey Bogart makes a big deal, and Sam Spade, that his handkerchief smells like gardenias or lilacs, I forget which. And in the movie, Peter Lorre, who you know is very distinctive manner, he's an effeminate character. In fact, in the summary of the book, he's described as an effeminate crook. And to movie going audiences in the 30s and well beyond that, that meant that he was not a regular, healthy person. There was something crooked about him, and not just in the legal sense. And Wilmer is referred to as a gunsel in the book, which has the suggestion that he is a male, uh, what's the word, sidekick to Gutman for sexual reasons. Elijah Cook Jr., a great character actor, plays Wilmer, and there's a suggestion that the relationship between Sidney Greenstreet and Elijah Cook is partly sexual, which could not be said outright, but it's very common in Dashiell Hammett, in Raymond Chandler's books, that there's a tawdriness, there is pornography, there sometimes is incest. You remember in Chinatown, which John Huston didn't direct but appeared in, the hidden secret is that a woman is both his daughter and his um, that a woman is both mother and sister to Faye Dunaway because John Huston's character, a wealthy landowner, has committed incest. That's part and parcel of the tawdry world of detective fiction. And let me say, while we're on the genre, there's a category of fiction called a crime novel. And a crime novel is typically told from the point of view of the criminals. It may not have a detective in it at all, but if it does, the detective comes later. A good example of crime novels are the show Law and Order, where the first part of it tells you how the criminals are doing what they're doing, sometimes in elliptical ways that's not clear who is this guy. But Law and Order begins with not just the solving of the crime, but the commitment of the crime. That's what a crime novel is. There can be a detective in it, but typically that's not the focus. A mystery novel does not have to involve a crime. A mystery novel can be something like the Book of Job, and I'm not making a joke. Why is it, Job wonders, that a good God will make a faithful servant suffer? The mystery of iniquity, the mystery of evil, is at the heart of the ancient Old Testament Book of Job. And there are novels in the Garden of Good and Evil that explore the idea of sinfulness or wickedness, the mystery of evil. Technically speaking, a detective novel focuses on the detecting of the crime, and most detectives have two skills in addition to being untouchable. The Eliot Ness and his crew were good crime fighters. They were untouchable, not because you couldn't kill them, but because you couldn't bribe them. And many people who saw the series with Robert Stack, book him, remember calling the different members of his crew. It wasn't that you couldn't shoot Eliot Ness. He wasn't untouchable that way. Like Sam Spade, he couldn't be bribed. And the idea of a detective being part of a police or legal squad led to another kind of detective story, which was called the policier or the police procedural. So if you read any of the novels by Ed McBain, or if you know Law and Order or Special Victims Unit, or any one of the 19 versions of Law and Order that Dick Wolf has become a billionaire on, those people are part of a team. So the idea that Ice-T is working with Sam Waterston and the different characters on those shows as part of a team, that's a different kind of detective fiction from what we're talking about in this novel, because this novel is a product of the Depression and everything I've said about that.
So Kate says, I found myself reflecting while reading this novel how contemporary crime writers have carried the Spade-like ethical code, modern-day knight-errant model into their characters. I'm thinking, for example, of Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch as an example. As with Spade, I think it's still a compelling way to frame a character.
I agree, and another good comment. Thank you for that. uh, uh, Raymond Chandler became a first-rate mystery writer, detective writer, but he was clearly riding on the coattails of Dashiell Hammett, who set the standard. And he would be very obvious, Raymond Chandler, in what he was doing. He's the one who named one of his characters Mrs. Grail, and he has a chessboard set up next to his bed where he sleeps mainly alone. This is in the novel The Big Sleep, I believe, his first great novel. He knocks over the chessboard and says out loud to himself, "This is not a job for knights." Knights, not a job for knights. Dashiell Hammett would never be that obvious. When Philip Marlowe goes to General Sternwood's home to be told that he's going to be hired to find someone, he's sympathetic to the old man, billionaire, to help him before he goes to the big sleep, that is death. And he decides that he wants to help this man. But when he's standing outside the mansion, he looks up, and above the doorway, there is a damsel in distress being helped by a knight is not doing a very good job. And one of Raymond Chandler's weaknesses is that he thought that metaphors had to hit you over the head and symbols had to be obvious. It was Raymond Chandler who would say things in his writings like, she had the kind of legs that would make an archbishop kick out a stained glass window. Kind of obvious, trying too hard to be literary. I'll say one last thing about him. He read in some writer's manual that one of the things you do as a writer is you describe what people are wearing and you describe the decor of a room. And in some of Raymond Chandler's books, which are very good books, there's the weakness is that he describes to you what the curtains are and what kind of decor is in a room for no reason other than he thought that that was good writing.
So at the moment, we're done with the comments at the moment. It's 10 minutes to 8, Mark.
Okay, well, I have more to say, but I just don't want to talk at people if they're waiting to talk to me. So I'll say a few more things. One of the things that's so satisfying about a police procedural or a movie about a legal trial or Law and Order, the TV show, or these detective novels is people like to see how things work out. They want the puzzle to be solved. They want the person who's guilty to be found. There's something very satisfying about the pieces fitting together. And if you watch Law and Order for some of the 120 years it's been on, you know that all the cases for the first few years always resulted in a verdict. When they're riding down on the elevator, regardless of who are the lawyers, who is the district attorney, you may not agree with the verdict, but there's a verdict. About 10 years into the series, they started having hung juries, or the person was not, there was a mistrial, and you didn't find out what happened next. Because by that time, we were far enough into the 20th century that the producers and writers wanted people to tolerate the idea that you don't know how it turned out. And so in these novels back in the 30s and 40s, you're going to find out that Wilmer shot Gutman. You're going to find out that so and so has been captured. You are going to have the loose ends tied up. And again, there's something very satisfying, like doing a crossword puzzle or solving a riddle about novels that have a mystery that gets resolved. Very therapeutic.
Would you say that accumulating mysterious clues and pieces of misdirection, which then ultimately climax with the answer, is essentially a model of the catharsis tension resolution?
Yes, and I want to say too, for those of you who like reading mystery novels because you want to compete with the detective and you want to try to figure out before he or she does, I'm thinking of Miss Marple and others, uh, they like it when they're given enough clues that they have a running chance. Many people who read detective novels love them. They think of them as a kind of uh, chewing gum of the mind. I don't mean they can't be great books, but they're not serious fiction. They're genre fiction, by which we mean characters are types rather than complicated individuals, although there are exceptions to every rule. And they're happy to watch it work out. They're not trying to compete with the solver. When Sherlock Holmes was invented as the first literary detective by Arthur Conan Doyle in England at the end of the 19th century, you know that Watson was the narrator of almost every one of those tales. And people complained if Watson didn't know something and didn't tell us because Holmes did it while he was not in Watson's company. And people would write to Conan Doyle before there was even a tradition of the detective, that is, the detective who wasn't part of a police force, who was a private detective. They would complain and say, how could we possibly figure this out if Holmes did something out in the garden and didn't do it within Watson's vision so we could know it? And Arthur Conan Doyle, who had a medical background, that's why Watson's a doctor, change the writing in the future, and everything that Holmes knows and sees and does, we're told in the book by Watson. Everything. Because even then, back in the early days, he wanted to play fair for a reading public. I'll say one last thing if we still have time.
Yeah.
I mentioned that a detective, in addition to being a virtuous person in the way I've described, has to have two talents, among others, and they have to do with this notion of reading a scene and reading people. So in the first Sherlock Holmes short story, A Study in Scarlet, that is in blood, Watson, home from Afghanistan on medical leave, yes, there was a war in Afghanistan back at the end of the 19th century, is amazed when he goes to rent rooms with Holmes to learn that Holmes does not know how many planets there are. He knows he's an educated man. He knows he's a successful detective. Why would such a man not bother to know how many planets there are? And Holmes says, because it has nothing to do with my job. I don't know how many planets there are, but I can tell you the brands of tobacco sold in every tobacconist shop within 5 miles of downtown London. Well, that's nonsense, but you have to believe it because Sherlock Holmes is a whiz, and what he's good at is knowing things that matter to his job. What Sam Spade is good at is what Columbo is good at. Peter Falk, another oddball detective. You have to be able to read a scene, a crime scene, look at a room and know what's amiss. And you have to be able to read people. You have to know who's lying and who's not. And that double talent is at the heart of every successful private detective. Many of us are good at noticing our surroundings, and we might notice when we go into a friend's house that somebody has a new lamp in the corner because that's how we're wired. And some of us are good about reading people, even people who are intending to be deceitful. But very few people are very good at both. Very few people are good about reading people, not just their faces, their mannerisms, making sense of the story, and reading a scene. And that's what great detectives have. And of course, Columbo is another detective like Sherlock Holmes who has an opium addiction, and the uh, the character that was played by the actress whose name I don't remember in Homeland, who had a mental illness and was still a functioning FBI or home security agent, um, is a lot of detectives have some quirk, what's called the defective detective. And with Peter Falk, it was that he seemed like a jerk. And how many times, if you've seen that show, and you have seen that show, he played that role on and off for 30 years, he would be leaving and then he'd turn around, one more thing. And of course, there wasn't one more thing. This is what he came to ask you. And because he was a working class guy who smoked bad cigars and drove an old car and wore a crumpled trench coat, people thought that he was incompetent. And of course, that was what made him so good. So there's a lot to be said or to unpack about detective fiction. I hope you enjoyed reading or rereading the book. If you've never seen the movie, it is a great film noir, dark movie directed for the first time by a man who would go on to be one of the great directors of Hollywood, John Huston, and has excellent performances. Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre clicked so much with audiences that they appeared in movies together, even if they weren't a team in the movie, because the public wanted more of these two very distinctive characters. So, Michael, I think that must bring us to the top of the hour, does it?
Yep, just about.
Yeah. So, thank you all for your attendance. Those of you who are celebrating the current holiday, Happy New Year. I want to thank Michael again for what a good partner he is. And I will tell you that Rebecca was a instant bestseller. It's never been out of print. I think it's the longest book we're reading. I think it's the only book that has real heft, but I hope you enjoy it. It has a famous opening line. If you don't know it, I won't quote it to you. I'll let you discover it. That's our next book, and as I said, very British.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. This was really great.
Okay, and that I will say is a Gothic novel about dead women, and it's modeled partly on Jane Eyre by Bronte. I hope you enjoy it if you've never read it or if you're going to reread it. And once again, I do recommend after you read the book, you see the movie. I hope you have a good night and again, a good holiday if you're observing. Good night. Thank you, Michael.
Good night. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We'll see you at the next one.